across this global world, 21 listed economies with tremendous security costs, liability, company costs, and criminal organizations, and organized crime listed economies undermine democracy, rule of law, and growth, sustainability, and claim confidence listed economies will multiply to Asia. And then the costs of leaders undermine security. Chamber of protection is drives out the single cartel by spurring U.S. and Mexico bilateral leverage. So, as 17 crypto, 7 markets become less visible. China issuing crime organization increase greater production cannabis shores, reduce crime corporation with sexual corruption, and cartel chain organized profitability of individual data literature productions that the government systems more effective. Bilateral leverage reduce crime across the single. Otherwise, they undermine global commitments for arms races. Now, how to pretend that isolating Mexico's cartel and American remedy for crime crackdown and treating the churches in America's role in the rest of the world counter border because of disruption in military everywhere outside of justice disruptive arms races, illicit weed smuggling causes nuclear tax plague. 17 new group sharp US in marijuana causes for meth nuclear device marijuana good children because radiation drug lords have good delivery shipment of the section of harm suggested it would be easy to cleanse competition and unlock cross-border exchange in 24th federal chamber production create distinctive rates legal revenue taxes on funding capital differential products never reveal product profits that foster competition and benefits reputation rates are higher and when registration is secured to greater production and more counterfeit cannabis and greater cannabis chamber production would be easy expansion to other states that will grow product price without safe production cannabis can export and remove the government influence standardizes that for federal chamber seats taxes other states and country table the country to greater expenses therefore the United States federal government should strengthen its production and investigate intellectual property rights and trademarks by removing the lawful use requirement advantage to its overage. PTO enforcement of lawful use undermines efforts to other agencies' enforcement regimes and creates a de facto private cause of action for laws unrelated to trademarks. Figure 22, lawful use undermines the administration of other federal laws, PTO sanction, violation of the non-trademark agencies' no discretion, tax use, section PTO fail to give deference to other agencies' PTO, instance of imposing sexual others and not by imposing the choice of other PTO to serve the carefully orchestrated enforcement regimes. THC's have enforcement of marijuana to based on belief of the states of the specificity of refusal registration to marijuana PTO undermine the premise of THC policy and influence lawful use requirements, de facto private cause of action, statute nominating private enforcement PTO effectively, giving private parties enforcement of federal law. That de facto private cause of action creates a backdoor for enforcement of other statutes firstly affecting the FCCA rape. This of the application of lawful use of grades and lacking that creates a backdoor section no private cause of action FCCA no private cause of action goes army spreading on lawful use and given on the basis of registering chamber in numerous cases except the lawful use on the basis of FCCA without mentioning any problem. It's not clear that guarantees drug shortages Kumar. By 24 shortages are becoming more common in the U.S. experience the more shortages in economic hospital scramble. The last thing construction compliant compound shortages complicated manufacturing sourcing quality issues and ingredient supply problems and challenging new just problems solely on increasing production cancer drugs like short specialty pharmacies and counter effects of shortages and increasing global supply. With the industry of compounding for going more capital one must attention shortages GLP one agonist type 2 diabetes and obesity street as well as the proper margins already the even during shortage of pharma challenge combining pharmacies and litigation criminal lawsuits against pharmacies and other treatment violation funds advertising under combination none make other claims found infringement dismiss they create crime cause of action adverse decision responsibility patents across the medicine that classes these response force then 24 companies special lines of financial supplies essential pharma cottage shortages representatives with the assistance of global healthcare system and global supply chain and they represent a growing public health threat towards many drug oncology medication and antibiotics pain medication effects the patients severe shortage of the reason people unnecessarily died on other medications health system more pronounced systems even one more shame commonly through COVID the supply chain drug shortages generic medicines pandemics cause huge amount by 23 international lab cause pathogens jump from humans to United States versus lotion out and industry more points of contact global travel intensity creating all producing pathogens early pathogens may only kill the small portion of the population deep historical evidence consistent with hyperbole humanity pandemics prevent civilization collapse of the we're causing disruption of food security and systemic chronic defenses fellowship engineering disruption temperature rapidly rise resulting in double gluten compound the harms of the initial gluten contagious cancer cells causes extinction 20 different representing evolution of phenomena several cancers involved to numerous occasions community species hosts involved continuous components innovation generating and evolution of opportunities maybe recapitulated progression of metastatic cascade the plant cells both nearest Migos 22 lawful use is no place for quality meeting will not go far enough limit when you reduce when not reduce the cost of medication previously after complicated the doctrine added to its opportunity to already be possible to work around the requirement without abolishing a PCO can voluntarily abolish the requirement initiative proceedings to repeal 2.6 non-TCF shows the old compliance no requirement agency needs to make a good no refuse registration because in order to violate some statute no one alleviated the harms that the simple requirement PTO could register market someone knows an applicant other laws confirm that bring the matter to an agency enforcing the law PTO is not abolish the lawful use the court's going to validate the requirement at the next opportunity.
Go to slide this
I have like 5 seconds.
You do?
Yeah.
Okay. Good for cross.
Yep.
Okay. Advantage 1, the Cremgen and the green cards both say that cannabis is being innovated now, or research for applications for AMR, solving nuclear war. Why is commercialization through trademarks necessary?
So our argument is about cross-border exchanges of that marijuana. So yes, in states like Colorado and California, there is some amount of marijuana innovation. It's not being exported around the globe, which means that diseases from AMR can emerge at any other point.
I guess I understand that, but you said that there exists cannabis innovation now, that there's a massive black market for it, where presumably these innovative products are being sold and transported across the border.
Sure.
I'm confused about why the app is a major change and how that innovation happens, or
conflating-
why it's actualized.
You're conflating the two internal links to our advantage. The first part of our advantage is about commercializations of
Yes.
innovations and those going across across the world. Or it's kind of like a second scenario, but the black market is about punishing people who, do illegal weed and sell it illicitly, and how that contributes to cartels.
Okay, actually, let's stay on these AMR and nuclear war cards. Neither of them are about cross-border exchanges. They're just about innovation happening at all, which, again, these cards seem to indicate it is happening to an extent.
Well,
Okay.
our hard look evidence index that claim and says that innovations do exist, and that those cards establish that they exist, but they're not being commercialized because of the lack of cross-border exchanges.
Yes, but that's
and
not
the
what your
fact-
impact cards
Okay,
are about.
but
Like, I understand
commercialization-
you read a card at the beginning of the advantage saying that these are not being transported across borders, but then the actual internal links and impacts of these scenarios are not about the exchange of these goods.
In order for marijuana technology to be effective at responding to diseases, the people who are getting like AMR and who have AMR now need to have that technology. Without commercialization, not enough people have that. Only in select areas do people have the technology, which allows pandemics to spread.
Let's go to the clap card. It seems to be partially about things happening in Asia or that are unrelated to cannabis, like human trafficking. What part of this card says that the U.S.'s black market is what causes
I mean,
harm?
our cards are actually pretty insane that that cannabis is such a large industry for the black market in China, and more importantly is that enforcement in response to
I
that
understand
cracks
that,
down on
but
illicit
you seem to
economies.
be conflating like multiple internal link cards. Like,
No,
No, so like illicit economies are cracked down upon once we have like enforcement regimes by the courts. So basically the internal links, like the court, once there's trademark registration, the courts allow for like, infringement cases and other things that allows them to police out the black market, that deters entry and like development of these industries because, they get sued or get prosecuted.
Sure. Contagious cancer, how does it cause extinction?
It metastasizes, and which means it can
Or
transfer.
actually, sorry, how does it get transmitted to humans?
It says that evolution, it's like an eco-evolutionary phenomenon that's mirrored by animals, and it allows us, our cells have an
Mirrored by, yes,
ability
this occurs
to
in animals.
evolve
It said it may provide
make it
novel insights
mutate.
into human cancers, i.e.,
Yeah.
oh, this is a fascinating thing that researchers at Harvard can probably look into. I don't think this
I mean,
says that
it's
they'll be
actually,
able
it's
to
actually
study
saying that,
this.
like, yes, cancers can spread in humans, and it's happened to other species before.
Harvard actually incredible universe. Sending it now. Okay, it's sent. Can I go from your stand? Order is 7 off, marijuana advantage, overreach advantage.
I have numbers. Mostly you good?
I'm good.
Wait, I don't see
Sam?
it.
Never mind.
You got it. The off-center of the nation state investment military power in a scenario planning overlies confident makes gender violence inevitable, but thankful from this foreign policy to organize positive peace and Israel, well-being, sharing, commons, COVID, 19, traditional princess security towards common health to war militarism, both ideological, and will becoming enemies and national femininity seen as weak. The international common exists to defeat what is seen in weakness, feminist foreign policy, reinvention, security to the masculinity, femininity, and access to those to make home ready, governance, arms trade, funding health and materials, reduction, partisan, monetary profits over human rights and accountability, women to support the effective force of weight in the monetary atmosphere, negatively impacts away, women are treating the center of rules determine the domination of one gender over the other, situation highly, and puts its policy making clear identities, and political security to maintain good distribution of power, feminist college race question or made better traditional security for every standards security when these standards have power to gender shift forward security for the individual and positive modes of peace and feminist foreign policy well-being. The biggest concern demands international reorientation for narrow newly defined security policy, multilateral agreements, and nationalism maintain hierarchy and national based hegemony of states. This worsening power is her confidence feminism is also an explanation for the national system how it can be restructured for that. Consensus securitization, traditional means of women in the system, feminist foreign policy, operational misunderstanding feminist foreign, or to manage shift in priorities, feminist foreign policy, human infrastructure change, all thing out new world structures, even if they're right, The act maintains means at least 10 current regs at rollback. Anderson 25. EO requires limitation. Trump EO calls for any agency promulgating new reg that identifies at least 10 existing ones to be repealed. The site to change the admin non-statutory new regs if there is doesn't be vacated. The CRA means rollback candidates must come from this narrow list, including transmissions regs. Most of the list will survive the status quo. Bruce 24. Trump comes to ways worse than Biden's regs. In the federal 60 days, CRA can eliminate rules stated by top others. Biden's effort to Trump to review explain the 97 rule surge and swing those who are safe. In CRA 60, the windows of court challenge will be coming from the inventory. CRA targets out 1 in 10 out policy of safe rules used court challenge. One will overturn their 49 fall major CRA. Practical Mike Sentence rollback most eligible rules remain intact. Fall completed major actions building regional transmission and generator interconnection. That rule is designed to boost grid resilience. For 24, first rule 1920 essential for ensuring reliable grid adoption requirements or transition to development states requirement to replace existing increased transfer capacity requires transition facilities that address interconnection needs. Use GET such as dynamic line radius, control advanced conductors. That solves Amferent's emergency grid collapse. Part 24, ordering 1920 require lines rolling safety burn the infrastructure. Lines dividing devs adopting clean energy require larger grid with perhaps because of the cost of calls. Rules Johnson cannot come fast enough project to preserve energy to move from private producing areas to urban city more resilient to DOE's fast sectors world transition preventing recovering from emergencies. Grid catastrophe is coming, extinction appears. 21, the Texas job electricity costs cities to collapse many now recover reliance on other independent CI sufficiently evacuate the cascade failure future people contain the astronomical large valley extent towards private future. Reducing likelihood is the most degraded into drastically reduce capacity to deploy take command access interventions increase recovery value and integrated grid. Business centralized make the entire system vulnerable. Disruptive traditional grid is incapable of withstanding the tax next off of the Canada decide Canadian marijuana is today because the first mover IPR advantages the plan is drops causing economic and software decline. FD19 cannabis become into Canadian companies come together in the domestic market with homemakers. Around the globe will be observing and determining whether domestic Canada industry is possible. In the respective countries, Canada's cannabis companies have a great opportunity to global cannabis market possessing technology and intellectual property rights will run the biggest first mover advantage for Canadian companies. Businesses are less well quota. Supply global markets utilizing the degree of actually sophistication required to operate in sensitive industries like cannabis, such like the red boosting cannabis external sector while spilling over into other industries like agriculture, manufacturing, stagnant growth causing Quebec's secession World War III. Matthews 14 category sparked World War III will be started for Quebec to succeed China, Russia building alliance second starting some war economic reasons tried to tender Canada. That's why we remove Article 5 to NATO. Goods will be committed. Russia, China, running sea to track and press their boundaries. Dissolution of Bolton separatist movements. Quebec will record Russia as retail China. Have a chance to mirror the US and first island China and the effect of Germany days. World War I. Next on to the advantage conflict.
Wait, skip that. I'm gonna fix the text.
Okay. Next up is ASPEC, the plan text was outside the branch of the USFG that does the plan it didn't vote negative for the clash of fairness, lack of a specification makes pure impact impossible and incentivizes vagueness and generics. On that by stopping next key protection means enforcement. When existing right, dining 14 protection means different things that allow or near use of protection. IP means enforcing private exclusion with economic rights creation. That's the thing for creating a new right garden. 24 to protect the right but not create the right for those things for a goal only when there's pre-existing legal techniques however within other laws limits the case of work people already governed by law. Violation of ethics has IP to create rights where none exist now does not strengthen protection of an existing IP right. Voting is for limiting around there means anything in the universe that's not eligible now can be not making it meaningful and negative possible and skirting all generics. Next off NDA, the 50 states involvement to national actors including the National Government Association which contains the administrative and federal permits on removing lawful use requirement. It competes, solves and expands rules sovereignty. But we're told when the states about their sovereign rival the protection not see the administrative program seeks to change its own cooperative seat and changing law states refuse the program respected this as well affects the federal laws in the states for assisting in conjunction with state changes the Fed become cooperative though the Fed has authority to agree to comply. Researching states opening counterbalances governance failures from federal and appropriate exchange of health consent inequality political terrorism collaborative reception unless we adjust risk partner failure costs are failing governance federal system is unbalanced power culture away from people creating the highly unbalanced central polarization that they inability to address systemic failures never get lasting solutions to return powers back to states otherwise its function will only get worse. Go back to the advantage counterplan. The United States federal government should create a national antimicrobial resistance action plan, including strengthening the monetary antimicrobial surveillance, provide livestock insurance to all farmers who are substantially reduce antibiotic use in favor of sustainable production, establish a national emergency immunization program, create an interagency task force and a national security council to strengthen law enforcement capabilities to these Asian countries, including China, provide all necessary incentive for these countries to cooperate, substantially increase enforcement of international counter release, sanctioning the SSC and travel ban, coordinate global data collection and scamming industry, launch a private public awareness campaign to warn citizens of scamming things, provide R&D funding for the application of candidates to remove radioactive waste from the atmosphere, and exempt the Food and Drug Administration from compliance with unlawful use doctrine. It solves AMR, their author, 1 C. Johnson 22, to contain AMR, the need for national antimicrobial resistance plan, sending to address resistance and surveillance system, livestock insurance program, the funding needed to protect the farmers by antibiotic exchange and sustainable development, shift with vaccine program, and increase vaccines to really reduce the need for antimicrobial steroids, protecting antibiotic use. Chinese crime can only be solved by international cooperation. 1 C. Clause 24, continuing transnational criminal networks will require political rights country by country, which will be defeated in zone overtaking degree with international coordination in central U.S. China each of they fail coordinate criminal networks will sustain require coordinate the whole government, person, and national security council, and agency actual sanctioned, law enforcement solicitation, budgeting these efforts to sanction the SEC, your travel, and to coordinate data collection worldwide, nationwide public awareness campaign to draw attention to scamming methods, immunization subsidies, can show new and critical use of national rapidly deliver vaccines, post overtimely vaccines, involvement with the pandemic, there must be rapid appropriate in the US, we have a number of vaccine delivered services, each state has their own device nationwide, system command structure online registration system, and exempting the FDA from compliance solves all of Advantage 2, which because it's their only link. Now, Advantage 1, negative reason why the plans key to AMR, when you see comes down to school descriptive and just says researching marijuana is good, not the increasing skills. He takes out both scenarios and enters passage just causes extinction for that's what it's difficult to enter your path into the catastrophe. It does not reflect potential causes from bioweapons, DIY science, civil support, into the risk from symbiomists, design new pathogens, and atypical use less than optimal characteristics, include delivery and perfect nation, potential casualties to be much more. Environmental overshoot is about the presence of antibiotics in the ecosystem. Either the app solves AMR through antibiotics, causing their scenario, or they solve nothing. When you see Vascaro, people can smuggle good quality products out of the US. There's also no reason to advocate innovation, the radioactivity stuff. It's already been discovered as per Green. Now, O-Prime, the internal link is backwards and wrong. O-Prime is dominating marijuana markets. Isn't the same as marijuana fueling O-Prime. Other sources like Latin America cartels selling narcotics to make up for weed. And it's a money laundering system itself that makes Chinese O-Prime powerhouse, not what they sell. Inserted words highlighting Green, no prime impact in the co-op's high really over 21. So that's what law enforcement led the war by the US against crime. That message taken using international co-op is great achievement. They combat organized crime. Many Latin American countries have established legal frameworks put through international organizations through judiciary until they've been able to collaborate with the US and measure operations. They don't solve root causes critical from the fentanyl. We insert in Green, Trump crackdown solves cartels struggling now where the plan is insufficient, and there's all causes of shipping in a nuke, and their ad says it's wrong. Insert Blake, overreach advantage. It just says that the PTO can't collab. There's no reason other agencies can't also collab to solve this support evidence, but Doge guts it. It applies to both scenarios because it how's that industry is caused by disease defense for the other advantage, but it doesn't make sense. It says existing drugs are in a shortage, inserted they're highlighting, and Suarez talks about supply chains writ large, which the app can't solve, also inserted Suarez. Suarez also never talks about emergent diseases. It's about existing ones obviously don't threaten extinction, and no reason lawful use starts out compounding pharmacies. No advantageous cancer is coming to humans, says it's rare in nature, not in humans. Also double blind, either drugs are impossible to bring contagious cancer, so production, or they exist, which, in which case some people would survive even with shortages. Lethality and contagiousness trades off with diseases, which means that it would never go existential because they burn out before people would all die.
Are you good?
Yeah.
Status?
Conditional.
Can you kick planks?
Yes.
Okay, let's talk about this 10-to-1 DA. So Trump unleashing prosperity deregulation exo says like an agency creating a new regulation, that agency must repeal 10 regulations, right?
I think it's
Not
just
exactly.
repealing
It's decided by the
regulations in
OMB director, or
Okay, so
they cooperate to decide.
So any agency, like, so PTO removes lawful use requirement. Any agency can now, I guess, you know, or actually, better question, why is the app remove or why is the app institute a regulation?
Why is it an EXO?
No, that's not the.
Yeah, why is the app
The EXO requires this
Sure.
central.
Why is the app regulation?
Because the lawful use requirement is like a regulation that exists within federal agencies. We think normal means would probably be an EXO to.
Yeah, and this is about
Not
an
EXO,
agencies
a
promulgating new regulations. The app would take away the lawful use requirement, which you just said was a regulation. So the app removes a regulation.
No, we think that would still be like a regulatory, activity that would
No.
follow this.
Your link is not to a regulatory activity. Trump's EXO is an agency promulgating a new rule, regulation, or guidance.
Exactly. This promulgates new guidance to repeal the law.
Okay. So to be clear, PTO removes something that is a barrier for people to procure trademarks, and therefore Trump thinks like, oh, that's a regulation.
It's a new rule, so yes.
Oh, okay. Like
It's
but
a
it
change from the status quo, which our evidence says is sufficient to trigger the link.
You just said that lawful use is a regulation. You agree with that, right?
We think it would be a new rule to repeal.
Yeah, lawful use is a regulation.
What,
The
like,
requirement.
sure, probably.
Okay,
yeah.
so
I mean,
yeah,
I don't know the intricacies of it.
Oh, why would, okay, so your cruise card, the internal link is about, it lists like a whole bunch of regulations. I understand you've undertyped this a bunch, but your part that actually talks about energy is about like FERC, obviously. So like why would a PTO regulation, or I guess lack of regulation, cause FERC to remove their thing?
You already asked us about this, and I think Phoebe said it was some specific like agency head over the
Yeah, sure, but why, I'm asking more, like not like their authority to do so, but why would they remove this one?
We think that, the cruise evidence says that that's one of the key regulations that's on the chopping block right now.
It just
Because
lists like
all the other regulations like
It lists
listed, all the
hundreds
other
of
regulations
regulations.
listed in this card are one that have been basically protected from Trump being able to repeal them.
Okay,
That's
let's go
for
to
the
the
cruise
Canada DA. Matthews is like So it lists, it says the impact of World War III, whatever. Then it says right after you highlighted World War III, quote, may not seem likely. And then, while such possibilities are unlikely, like, why do you think this
May not seem likely, but there is one area where a foreign foe could surpass the West.
And then it says, while such possibilities are unlikely, and then the rest of your part.
Yeah,
Why
but
do you think that the app would like
like
anything above zero?
we think that the app would be this like huge break in the Canadian economy because our card says that like taking away the marijuana industry would spill over the agriculture, would spill over the manufacturing and everything else in Canada. So it would obviously promote the plan. Huge discontent.
Except that I
It's in the other building, I'm not going.
Yes.
Advantage marijuana, advantage overreach, A-spec, T pre-existing, FMIR, advantage counterclaim, federalism counterclaim, Canada DA, 10-1 DA.
Federalism was after advantage counterclaim?
Yes.
Or- yes?
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I'm good.
Yes, the gender prevalence is very quickly after combining with drug resistance, posing a unique that's drawn. They say Crispin is quote descriptive. That's not relevant because it's a question of whether that research and innovations are commercialized, which the app is key to because it spurs cross-border exchanges. Their evidence doesn't assume the risk is linear. As we increase cross-border exchanges, it decreases the risk of engineered pathogens being likely. Thorstad is wrong. It doesn't account for the combination of drug resistance with an engineered pathogen, and it's a professor of philosophy. So there's no qualms in determining existential risk in terms of antibiotics. Environmental overshoot. Yes, once they're integrated to the microbiota, they collapse key earth cycles, killing ecosystems that sustain human life. That's Precaro. They have the antibiotics will die out in the environment, which means that even if they're in the ecosystems now, they will die out, which means that they won't be increased in the future, which means that cannabis will be able to transition ourselves away from antibiotics to prevent environmental collapse in the future. They say people can smuggle good quality product. That's not how illegal drugs work. They do smuggle bad quality product because that's most probable, and people have no recourse, but only under the affirmative is there a recourse for illicit goods because you can sue them under the trademark doctrine. They say no reason that the app is key to innovation, but it's a question of commercialization, which I did above. They say the group the next two arguments about Chinese crime, that's wrong. The Chinese crime is increasing in the status quo because marijuana has propelled it to a global powerhouse, which literally increases the risk of conflict. Our evidence says that in Oklahoma alone, $40 billion of illicit Chinese marijuana weed was grown, which means that, and that's our main source because the Chinese government is cracking down on other places. The Yolo evidence is indicted by our CLAP evidence, which says that Chinese crime undermines weak states to ignite regional conflicts that go nuclear, which their evidence isn't specific, which means you should prefer Saha as well, which says that it alone causes extinction. They said crypto is the root cause. That's wrong. They don't. It's propelling it. The Chinese government is clamping down now. That's our TAN evidence. They say Trump cracks down. That's wrong. He's not focusing. He's focusing on migration, not focusing on migration, not drugs. The all cause. The last scenario. There's two. Yes, pandemics say constitution by collapse of society, the ending engineering of the transfer, cognitive collapse of society, and infection of all humans. That's bomb. The 1 and C1 disease. Group 1 and C1, 2, and 3. Our evidence is about how compound drugs can fill in for the disease supply chain shortages, which answer all of these warrants. They're being cracked down right now under the lawful use doctrine because there's a private cause of action, which the FDA allows. They say there's no contagious cancer. That's wrong. It falls fast. Once it hits a metastatic cascade, eliminating humanity, even if some people survive, that's irrelevant because it's still a big impact and there's a risk everyone dies from incest and compounding effects. Burnout paradox is wrong because of compounding effects. USFGs are agents for specifications, no risk basis, that's unprovable, arbitrary, and loose bad agent counterbalance, that decent to research, default to reason beliefs, persisting. 1. The function of the plan allows for a change in distribution of current rights to the plan text needs to vacuum 3. Strengthening production. We solve the return or manuality acting circuit database of every opinion or structure concerning counter preparation. My primary variables, whether action transfer or weak and IP protection transfer versus weak refers to application according to the right chart to make it easier to acquire. IP rights running the scope of protection make it easier to prove or strengthen or research protection. All strength and protection prefer a particularly our evidence sets the framework from which all IP is derived from. There is no intent to define as Frank slides to create an HRB after and big changes from the square root became big. Advantages 4 functional limits, region nurse, tap, get clock, due to counterbalance, and other restrict. MAR. 1. Framework the way the app gets links to the place beyond the implication, their interpretation moves the app to defense in the office, versus the only impact, and 4. Clash limits to educational benefits, strike off all other performative contradictions of the right. Don't say R is intrinsically ethical, then refuse further investments into it. Per 2. Primitive out solves and shields. 3. Tuition outwells billions, dies, irreversible, which precludes any alternative within life, including decay. 4. No link, no gender root cause, 18. Right. How did duration general language help support how power included the mechanism of empire? Which not explain not concept but concept effect or use one policy. The gender has explained the limits of challenges shifting demonstrating relevance situating alongside strategically economic. Political factors never need who's the whether race and religion Americans is the condition to be a policy for constantly how gender and class should be introduced in pure weak or Cuba. Culture does not eliminate ourselves or others. Actually, culture within the class what is most important about you is foreign relations. 5. It can't solve A doesn't do the app. B the all gets cracked down by the safe fashion Republicans will crack. Not in doing everything to prevent the 6 floating picks are better possible leverage after this policy makes the all moving target. If it is
counterplan. 1, permanent build. 2, permanent counterplan. 3, permanent plan is any combo of the plan 4 links to that benefit. Because the last plaque in plan includes agency action. 5, presume any plan without an advocate, explicit advocate doesn't solve. They've analytically asserted it does. So we'll analytically assert it doesn't. If they say this is arbitrary, that's our point. Their entire counterplan was inserted green highlights, which we'll also throw out because they didn't actually read them, which they have not, means they aren't presented as evidence in this debate. Evans putting up his hands for no reasons, but they recut parts of the articles that we did not include in our card bodies, which means they certainly have to insert those because it otherwise skews the affirmative, because I have to give impossible to AC. 6 can't solve. National immunization plan can't be implemented because people say no, FDA, CDC, etc. are being done now, which means they don't have the resources to do so effectively. Provide livestock insurance can't solve because farmers don't trust it. And the next 2, Chinese crime funding comes from the U.S., so doing it in the United States is key. Chinese government is already cracking down to other places, which means that the U.S. is the last bastion of Chinese funding. Last plan, PTO is interpreting it improperly, which is bad, which means that's a question of PTO action, not about the other action, the federalism. 1, no internal aimless, but a single instance of uncorporate federalism doesn't mean a broad shift. B, no impact. 15, critical and stabilizing higher in the world with radical power distribution picture of America, the outside world. Can see close to being work reach of heads to render power predictable. Mature institutions made it predictable to regular space policies made for projects as we create. When the system reduces the problem, most students can confuse observers. C, no impact. The only line that mentions states being better governance. Can see it's all causes, and that it takes 30 years to solve. 2, can't solve. Congress says no. 70 letters to because we'll ask whether PPP was due to the Senate develop grounds for concern. However, Congress would respond we have 3 stimulus there's no object. Rather than being different, understand if they can sharp divisions over whether cooperative federalism or cooperative convention response to threats to stop implementing Obamacare. We must assume Congress is capable of aggregating effects to reach a rational result. This might seem absurd. PTO actions keeping response to distorting language and purpose of the requirement PTOs are going to land about PTOs. The loan discussed stats to DOB. That's suggested Congress referred to lawful use elsewhere. PTOs raising misconstrued Congress lacking text. PTOs suggested lawful use is taken by common law. PTO certain 1 never require property around acts of view that agency has never read 3 for build solves internal 4 for the plan and the campaign over other issues. Sectors inserted. Russell will send out text. Counterplays must be textually and functionally competitive. That's the key to half-ground and objectivity. 5 for the template. So the way the plan can be done. 6, permutation to the counterplan, then the AF or interprets terms to specify sequence but not time frame. The text will be the counterplan text, and then the plan text. If they want it, they can just ask us for it. Should refer to future boundary, should be future possible. Future events can be. Canada's market is, quote, deeply flawed. Last report, panel experts release evaluation of 1 legalization of the Congress final report survivor review concluded Canada's market is deeply flawed. Many companies are struggling to turn a profit. Many view Canada's example through a critical lens. It's not key to Canada's broad economy because obviously proven by the fact that legalization only happened a couple of years ago and Canada's economy is still high. No trade-off. Canada has already established itself as a leader, which means that American IP policy won't affect it. First mover advantage is not established by the card, which also doesn't have pause, which means you strike it out for flow. Economic the Matthews card is wild ass speculation. Even their authors agree. I'll read this three highlights. Matthews 14 says published an unlikely scenario of a successful Quebec independence movement to sending World War is unlikely. This isn't a DA as of the 1 and C, so we get new answers because it lacks a link, uniqueness, and internal link. 101. FERC is structurally screwed and can't solve grids by 24. FERC did not act on policy that will expand to reach original power and construction. Not everybody's going to get everything they want. That's the nature of these large proceedings and these large rules here at FERC, and the grids are fine now. There's no threats, and even if they are, there's no reason the FERC will be able to solve those threats. Impact is also the impact evidence is also miscut, which means you strike it off your flow. It starts in the middle of the sentence. No blackouts. Don't shoot grids stop go down. Grids have not demonstrated capabilities. The grid is resilient and segmented targeting networks would not cause blackouts incident at one site. Require highly tailored tools and operation will not scale. Flow plays all possible, but scaling is unlikely. No linkage to GPS setting cross-sites the lawful use requirement is a regulation. The AF removes it. That's explicitly anti-regulatory, which means it doesn't activate Trump's XO. If any patent policy causes this, then literally any IP protection guns. It's about Department of Labor, not the Patent Office. Industry 25 DOL, plus it's authority of the FERC, not the PTO. Industry 25, Federal Energy Regulatory Commissions. If any agency action is sufficient to trigger the link, then any regulatory team would be sufficient to trigger the link. Dr. Oblivion, first regulation passed last year, every year. Before that, pre-surveillance, it also concedes rules are slowed down throughout, and there's no internal to total collapse.
Awesome.
Okay. Good.
Yeah.
Reasons to reject 2.
Conscious voter dissolves one straight turns maximizes.
So you didn't read this. Alright, that's fine. Yeah.
Cross-sex is fine.
Anything besides convo. And you just read it cross-sex.
Floating pics, I'm pretty sure.
Okay, just floating pics. Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Canadian marijuana down now. Why?
Yeah, so our last evidence is from like 6 months ago, and it says that after, when legalization was happening, Canada decided that after a few years, a panel of experts would review and decide and basically say like how it's going. That came back after delays from COVID, and they said it's, quote, deeply flawed, and that there are huge problems with it.
So like, if there are huge problems, wouldn't then they, maybe like try to fix those problems with new regulations or something? That seems pretty logical.
So like that's probably your uniqueness argument in the block, but that's probably wrong because still Canadian cannabis is going down in the status quo.
Okay, wait,
Now,
why
I'm
is it
for-
going down? What are like the warrants for why it's going down?
I mean, like, I just get a newsletter about this stuff, but I know for a certainty that, like, the sales are going down and that the market is not robust
No,
and
but
that
why?
tons of market players are leaving the industry.
Okay, so these are just like broad sweeping assertions. Why wouldn't it be the same in the US?
Huh?
Why wouldn't it be the same in the US?
Well, it is right now because you can't get
No, like post like, repealing the lawful use, why wouldn't US producers face the same struggles that Canadian ones do?
Because the U.S. has a stable regime via the Controlled Substances Act, which means once it's off, then that would allow for things like banking under Section 280E, which would provide consumers and cannabis firms with, the ability to get banking. It would provide them with other protections. You want me to keep going?
And Canadian firms just like can't bank in the status quo, like what?
Like, obviously I'm not like an expert on Canadian marijuana, where this is a new DA, but like, I'm like very certain the market is going down because like, I get newsletters every day.
Okay, that's fine, but organized crime scenario, like explain to me why organized crime sustains these Chinese, or why marijuana sustains these Chinese organized crime.
Yeah, so our Rotella evidence is really good. It's an investigative journalist who uncovered that Chinese crime is driving U.S. marijuana and the fentanyl crisis. In Oklahoma alone, $40 billion.
Okay, yeah, you love this Oklahoma statistic,
from
but you're still not
illicit
answering my
marijuana.
question. Why are these Chinese crime firms like sustained by marijuana?
Yeah,
Why couldn't
our
they just switch to
Rotella
other
evidence
legal
says that marijuana propels Chinese crime to a global powerhouse, and that Chinese officials are trying to crack down in other places, but since it's happening in the United
where are they
States,
trying to crack down?
human trafficking, like crypto,
Crypto, how does the Chinese government crack down on crypto when
because
like, these
those
Chinese
people are doing
crime
it
people
within
just
China,
move out of
China,
China?
China can do it within China. But the problem is that once it's in the United States,
Crypto
Chinese
is
officials can't crack
decentralized.
down.
How can China enforce this?
Well, through know your customer provisions, which they're implementing in the status quo, which would prevent.
Why couldn't these criminal groups just set up like a crypto wallet in like the US or something?
Well, they're not.
Okay.
Starting. stop right before it. The order is the advantage counter plan, then the marijuana advantage, then the
I just saw the document was called care package.
PDA. It's advantage counter plan something 1, 2.
no,
No, so-
just the advantage counter plan, then advantage plan.
Okay.
I'm answering like condo at the bottom of the advantage counter plan, but do what brings to the net benefit, abolishes the lawful use requirement, do the counterplan severs the counterplan doesn't strengthen IPR, remove the lawful use requirement, vote for F condo, an argumentative irresponsibility, perm any combo, I get new answers if they re-specify, but it still abolishes the lawful use requirement, which triggers the link, links to the net benefit is wrong, the counterplan does not establish new regulations, so no regs need to be repealed in response. Solvency advocate theory, I don't know what they're yapping about. Evan swears on his life that he read and did not simply insert the re-highlightings into 1 and C. We read their cards back at them, which is sufficient for a solvency advocate, and anything else puts an arbitrary limit on net ground, which is bad on an FI's topic with no unified generics. Plank 1, it solves AMR, it creates a resistance action plan that strengthens and monitors antimicrobial surveillance. 20C Johnson says it's key to resolve the internal link. There's no warrant for no ability to implement it. Normal means would be funding, etc., to enforce the counterplan as per durable fiat, which overcomes Trump's cuts to critical agencies. Second plank also solves it. Johnson says providing livestock insurance to farmers who substantially reduce antibiotic use in favor of sustainable production is sufficient to solve. 2AC asserted farmers don't trust it. No warrant or impact of that, and it's not substantiated by their ad. We re-highlighted the cards say this is the key internal link, and you should disallow new TRA clarification. Plank 3 solves disease broadly. It establishes a nationwide emergency immunization program that rapidly and effectively gives out vaccines and enables nationwide development. The counterplan builds on scientific innovations achieved during COVID that solves and is cost effective. That's Matthews 21. Massively promoting vaccine development, made possible by reason categorized by the process of developing vaccines for new diseases. The U.S. needs to build on vaccine tech innovations and new right of response mechanism for vaccines to be developed and manufactured by Francio. Tremendous weapon for global public health that put us in a better position. Only when we build the infrastructure. mRNA and adenovirus vaccines can be quickly developed, but low manufacturing capacity prevents deployment. This Matthews 21. We can develop vaccines more rapidly the next time a major outbreak occurs that we can speed up the testing process for vaccines and we'll fund the vaccine. Solve earlier hundreds of thousands of deaths. Bottlenecks could continue to be a problem and the concerted effort to maintain to build and maintain infrastructure comes in. Increasing vaccine development is feasible and solved. Berkeley 21. We must improve vaccine manufacturing for the next virus and increase investment tech. Make it possible to identify and develop antigens rapidly. Planks 4 and 5 solve O-crime. It creates an interagency task force that is centered within the National Security Council that strengthens the enforcement capabilities of Southeast Asian countries and provides incentives to cooperate on O-crime. It also increases enforcement specifically tailored to international crime through things like sanctions, asset seizures, and travel bans, providing international pressure for a response. I'm kicking the scamming claims. The funding for O-crime warrant doesn't matter. The counterplan solves enforcement, which solves the second level internal link to the scenario. Plank 8 solves nuclear war. It provides substantial R&D to enable cannabis innovation to apply it to removing radioactive waste, which makes nuclear war survivable. When you see green as the impact card, it never says commercialization is necessary. Just that research into marijuana specialized application is. When you see Harlow says that the world wants that technology and we'd be willing to export it, which means that research alone is sufficient. The last plank solves advantage 2. It exempts the FDA from compliance with the unlawful use doctrine, which solves the only internal link. Application of the lawful use doctrine is what hurts the FTCA because it means the FDA can't make decisions independently of the doctrine. Providing an exemption solves. We read yellow. When you see 17. The application of the unlawful use doctrine means the automatic backdoor and complies with the FTCA and powers for the FDA based on FTCA accepted unlawful use based on the FTCA. That answers the argument about the PTO misinterpreting it. Even if that's true, their court still indicates that this would solve it, even if it doesn't go through the PTO. I'll answer condo here. This isn't what cross-sex binding means. It means you can't lie in politics and that you're stuck to what you defend, but you cannot make new arguments. I know that you also didn't flow it, and this is a bad precedent because it incentivizes ignoring other teams' questions and just reading new cards during cross. The advantage, marijuana. No engineered pathogens risk. Large-scale protection is too difficult and attacks will be crude. With check-skill risk, that's the worst stat. Even full AVR wouldn't come close to extinction, but disease will never be post-antibiotic. That's Smith 16. The worst case, when you went in like 1940, infectious diseases have been reduced by 90%. There's never post-antibiotic therapy will be effective by rapid testing all the time. A few bugs are resistant and untreatable, even though there's something that are always susceptible to at least one. This will not in the usefulness of antibiotics. Every empiric and basic evolutionary science disprove extinctive spread. That's Walsh 20. Epidemic after epidemic of pneumonia. Disease threat of extinction of 88 over 33 extinctions, less than 4% attributed to disease, a small number isolated among like humans have numerous and spread every epidemic that took place before modern medicine to science even most evolution limit and catastrophic potential pathogens highly transmissible, rarely kill even absent countermeasures. Empirics prove that's practically true. Finding good data that makes it clear how big a problem this is. More than 20 million resistant infections occur annually in the US, kill 1.27 million people globally. It will be gentle, mediated by cooperation and containment. Err against alarmism. That's card 17. Maybe our nuclear 10 million deaths. Nations are very actively involved in finding solutions. Prevent future cases spilling into the public. There's no army of equality that will overthrow the human race. The antibiotic apocalypse will be gentle. Cannabis innovation is zero. Their evidence never says weed will be applied to sucking metals out of the atmosphere, and the crops would probably be wiped out in a nuclear war, which takes out their effectiveness. It's also dumb. Their impact card says nothing about trademarks, which means cannabis in a vacuum should have solved since their evidence is from 2018. It also means trademarks aren't the main barrier to the tech being applied, which is true for the rest of their scenarios too. The internal link on O-crime is backwards. When you see Rotella, says the O-crime dominates marijuana markets, but it doesn't say that marijuana is key to sustain organized crime. Other funding sources like narcotics and human trafficking means these groups obviously stay around even if they marginally lose out on some funding. There's no reason they wouldn't shift to other illicit drugs in response or double down on the other things that they're already doing. All the stats in the 1EC are obviously quote descriptive, but if substances and O-crime broadly are such a big source of revenue, then Chinese O-crime groups would want to seek other avenues even post-plan. But there's no O-crime impact. Global cooperation to stop it is high. Working in Europe, Asia, and Latin America, treaties are being enforced to crack down, and then cooperation diffuses tensions. No China war. That's Valley 22. Neither China nor US has written victory unless commitment to both of the US and modifies charges with the Turkish aggression and put a floor under hostility. The Chinese was distracted by changes, warming, and supply from the pathogens population and the attack from the fragilities of polarization devastate. The US China is constrained by geography and the pollution and political system and the weaknesses. Famous leaders to make accommodations. SES is stable. That's about 20. Neither have much other than peaceful coexistence. The conflict is painful. Considering both are nuclear peaceful, greatly diminished rivalry and SES is going by the war and the wars some way off. There are several encounters of the everyday with professionals remain restrained and neither increase activity conquered with 19 despite media reports. Even in the worst case scenario, there's still no escalation. Low 22. In the worst case scenario, the U.S. accidentally uses ICBM is unlikely strike. Big enough to neutralize all. No need for China to launch the overreach advantage. Other agencies solve the impact. If every other agency is coordinated and the PTO is the sole holdout, then that's sufficient because their impact card is not about the PTO. DOGE also kills agency effectiveness, which prevents solving for the internal link anyway. Their card also says that the PTO needs to coordinate with other agencies on patents, which is certainly a bigger internal link than lawful use. Contagious cancer scenario is terrible. It's uncertain. It's about animals, and no evidence says that it applies to humans or that it's even possible for it to spread across species. Animal studies cannot predict human behavior. Mark Calhoun 12. Langley concluded that relying on animal surrogates of human illnesses is flawed and hurt investigations as well as several published systematic reviews of the reliability of animal models show fewer than 50% of animal studies are predicted to human outcomes sufficiently, and animal models can be useful, but it has frequently observed that events about animal models cannot be translated to the clinic. All disease defense applies. Burnout means that virulence and lethality trade off, which takes out both AMR and this. There's no explanation for why new diseases overwhelm it, because this is a basic scientific truth. I'm going to read one more part on ADR. I can't find it. It's fine. I'm good.
Process?
Yeah.
Alright. First, I want to start with this FDA exemption point.
Yeah.
Can you just walk me through how it works?
Yes. So the RAVE evidence says that the reason that the FDA is being adversely affected by the lawful use doctrine is because it overwhelms their independent decision-making authority in whatever the abscess of problem is. The counterclaim thus provides an exemption saying that the FDA need not comply with the lawful use doctrine, which enables them to exercise independent regulatory authority.
So I
Which is
just
what
wanna
the
make
rate card is about.
So I
It's
just want
about
to make
giving
it
the
clear.
FDA autonomy. Go
So I
ahead.
want to make it clear, your counter plan is about what the FDA does, not at all about what the PTO or private companies do.
Yeah.
Okay,
Well, yes. It's
Um,
about the application of the doctrine, but yes.
Well, explain that, because I'm a little
I
bit
think
confused.
I
The
always
FDA is not applying the doctrine of the status quo.
It's no. The rate card says that it is being applied to the FDA.
Yeah, okay, we're talking about the Food and Drug Administration.
Yeah.
Okay. The counter plan for vaccine development. Can you explain, like, what about so you've explained that low manufacturing capacity prevents deployment. How does the counter plan resolve that?
Yeah, I think I answered this on the other disease plank. Normal means is increasing funding, any necessary resources for enforcement. Which
So what
is
does
part
it
of
mean to
yeah.
increase funding and enforcement for vaccines?
What do you mean? Like the
Like,
development
you
of
just
vaccines, presumably.
What?
The development of vaccines, presumably, through
So
the
what does that
National
mean? What does it
Emergency
mean to
Agency.
develop a vaccine?
To
And how does
develop
funding,
through
like,
research, through I'm really confused by
okay,
your
like the federal government never actually does a ton of research into vaccines. That's the private
Under the
sector.
counter plan, they what?
Okay, so under the counter plan, the federal government invests trillions into vaccine deployment.
Yeah.
Okay, and this is just like a new 2NC assertion.
This is what the 1MC card
Where
is
does your
about.
1NC evidence substantiate the claim that we are going to spend trillions on vaccine development
Well,
as
okay.
part of the federal government?
I think the 1NC card is about the development of the establishment of the emergency immunization program. A part of that would presumably be adding funding because that would probably require a lot of money to do. But that's not. I don't think that's
Okay,
a new
the-
assertion because that's clearly part of the solvency mechanism. Even if the card does not explicitly say
The
like,
O crime.
oh, we're going to spend X amount of money.
The O crime claim, so you create this inter-country panel to
Yeah.
combat Chinese O crime.
Uh-huh.
I'm confused by that would, what would that look like? What would they do?
They would cooperate and the counterplan provides incentives to cooperate on O crime. The 2NC gave examples
So what are those
like
types of incentives?
sanction incentives like monetary presumably.
So like paying people
Yeah.
a ton of money?
The 2NC also gave examples of what that agency or what that council
Okay, so
cooperative
that
group
prevents
would
Chinese
do,
O crime in other
such
states.
as sorry,
That prevents Chinese O crime in other states,
and what do you mean by
like
other
other
states?
countries.
Presumably in the U.S. as well,
Like how would it be implemented in the U.S. to ramp up and ratchet up enforcement?
because presumably cracking down on Chinese O crime includes what they do in other countries, i.e. the U.S.
Okay, is everyone good for an order?
Yeah.
FemK, Federalism Counterplan, 10 for 1 dissent, Canada dissent.
K, federalism 10-1 Canada.
Yes. Okay, Sam, good. The purpose is testing opposition, conceding gender is not the root cause, so it takes out this perf thing theories, reason reject the argument, not the team, federalism, conceding the permanence and testing opposition theories, reason reject the argument, not the team, the 10-1, this I concede, kick it, concede, agencies always make regs, which should bump no offense because this overwhelms one instance of the plan to AC was just an assertion backed up by no evidence, concede no internal link, and no impact, Canada dissent. In that way, its magnitude, economic decline causes collapse tension, which ignites World War III. They'll align with Russia and China, and the U.S. will be drawn in, causing great power war. Turns all smuggling impacts CA extends uncertainty through the cannabis industry, creating a hole for the black market. Theoretically filled in, and Canadian leadership friends to collapse of global institutions. Extinction, creativity, and urgency to reinvigorate multilateral institution was eventually can't embrace all this. Will this working increase risk of conflict of nature, powers, and leaders to cooperate as a function since we have best over world unique competition, environmental disaster, terrorism, cyber, and atmosphere, disaster, migration. Yet this is now under attack. This is the first sentence to one of the bricks of systems breakdown, candidates, and theory, influence, government history, so over multilateral, important role in the creation of institutions becoming greater works and governance to be at the heart of reinvigorated multi-level and solve the problems that threaten our world. Russia, China, and Iran will use distraction to escalate hotspots. World War III, Farley 19 crisis was bring about by the global commons platforms. World War III, Iran's war, practicing Gaza, Israel, might indicate the Russian comments and oil tempting the US and Russia, and intervening US-China relations and precarious G. Having sent the resolution in ESER, ECS, China, Iran, and Russia might feel frictions. Because spark an active spark the next war. Secession causes following separatism globally, extinction for cars. 14 collaborating organized courts got Italy, Britain, Italy, follow suit, rich provinces like Canada, and subsidies of separatists to see we can move into other countries 1,000 private inconvenience for favors, government code with examining foreign terrorism and leveraging finance and use of microstation and separatist way to less capable organization lead the world war, separatism, English probably of a third. Now, this set is unique, solves, and turns case. Canada is the best for marijuana innovation, and new regs were just made from 8 days ago. Pillar 25, regulatory advancement or accepted resurrection built upon condition of progress Canada established Salvador, global leading cannabis to modernize regulation, individual must keep momentum going heavily the global industry. Next chapter, Health Canada introduced biggest updates of regulation, easier to understand, liberally help more Canadians. Unintended public service doing change the packaging and labeling. Rules will be big win for consumers, increasing production numbers for small operations and positive step micro-production that will be able to scale the business, create more public diversity for customers, regulations involved towards medical first model information, access, patient centric, corporate 10 towns, healthcare, foster innovation. Canada's already been through growing pains and displayed the export to the US, solving crime, but US legalization trades off. On 25, Canada already gone through legalization, growing pains, surviving producers, forced to expand market internationally, including the US. We can capitalize on international markets that are open. The US cannabis companies can't because it's not federally legal. Canada, the world's largest exporter, now is the time because of the macro environment for us to go and support Canadian growing industry that has first mover advantage. All our cars post-state fares in the expert survey, so you should scratch them because you know new regs obviously solve. Now, the link, plan takes Canada's economy, marijuana is broadly key. The law for use requirement makes US attractive to companies because of favorable IPR, centering it as the #1 place for IP registration. That spills over across every sector. Exodus causes agriculture, means agriculture and manufacturing will decline, and companies will race to go to the US that focus economics, which is a drop and tax spillover claim. Yes, quals are a reputable source that reports in economics citing data. It was in the 1C card, and the quals were also in the 1C card, and they have zero response. First trigger is the launch of the economy. FE 19 Canadian businesses are consequently better equipped to enhance quality technology data for their companies. Companies have a significant advantage. Future that's the Canadian cannabis industry. It depends how efficient Canadian companies leverage their upper hands. That's imperative. The Canadian cannabis company take the most there. For two inventions, the biggest achievement in Canada by legalizing cannabis will come from the positive economic opportunities and benefits for the country. Yes, trade-off the US can poach first mover advantages. If Canadian companies relocate because of reforms to lawful use, Hunt 19 with Canada's from legalization of recreational marijuana. The US cannabis industry set side and Canada capitalize opportunities that legalized market provide the relative. Canada can be to commence cannabis franchise development makes it a compelling first step on the growth path for emerging cannabis brands and building vending franchise rather than franchise potentially hinges on various factors from the long-term stability. Lawful use keeps companies in Canada. Hunt 19 primary obstacles currently limiting cannabis franchise in the US is their inability to register federal trade markets, issue markets associated with business, and then good to short the prize companies that interest in present their trademarks business acquiring a trademark simply by using a market and selling or rendering goods or services federal trademark registration brands trademark to approach benefit to the trademark is only eligible for registration. But then it's been used in commerce violence all federal laws. It's all commerce between the laws regulated by Congress. Companies that have tried to obtain federal trademark registration have been unsuccessful, while certain cannabis companies haven't deployed their franchise business model. It's not appear they have done so with federally protected marks. Now, stagnant growth causes coexistentialism. It's a tinder that led to satisfaction to the point of revolt. That's Matthews. It isn't just speculation. Matthews has had the predictions from experts to say it sounds impossible, but it's actually very likely. The final blip in the 2AC was that it wasn't a diss ad. This is wrong. It's two cards. But the one that link is surprisingly good and says it collapses the Canadian economy. Now, yes, it's accidental. Surprisingly, they're growing in power again, and the plan flips the election. Sanders 25. The best separatism research has been over 10 years. PK government problem in your own question. Quebec becoming sovereignty is the largest history. We're returning once again. Quebec from your who's under nationalist push for Canada's federal government to devolve maximum amount of money part of the problems with elections scheduled for October 2026. The PK once given up for that may return the power. Must happen between now and election day. And the victory is hardly assured. Economics are the rallying point for separatism. RT 12. Progressive and separatist party experiencing actually. I won't read that. The success of independence movement depends on growth. For the 14, ruling strength and coexist position and institution today and future required independence will depend on whether current and future conditions require Quebec leave the Canada Federation growth rather than for its growth rather than due to grievances. Canadian class causes Quebec's nationalism. Neutral in 19, Wilson Quebec show for independence for circle of the 50 margin to separatism important factor we do satisfaction with the economic prosperity range in most of the country. Many Quebec borders were with their province will suffer economically if it separates.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
You guys can walk around a little bit.
Have fun, Judge.
going to counterplan this ad.
Yeah.
Cool.
Let me download it.
Sorry, I knew you said this. Marijuana overreach advantage counterplan Canada.
GBS, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Not in order.
I'm good with PDs.
I'm good.
Reject Alvarez theory just in case the hidden O crime outweighs it causes Southeast Asian instability, which also great powers to go nuclear. That's a high yes. Internal O crimes, the biggest internal links to the economy by billings, which only we have evidence on, and none of their defense assumes instability in Asia. So yes, China war causes, and the causing great powers which cause is the U.S. and no code and greater instability in the regional causes, no which triggers last shot overreach advantage. Disease outweighs drop the impacts beyond just infection and knock-on effects. Cause civilization collapse, geoengineering the stratosphere, which independently causes tension and warming. That's the bomb. Defense does not apply. 1, it's not about knock-on effects. 2, positive viewers should not assume globalization increase interconnected systems. The bomb evidence. AMR stuff is not about zoonotic or mutated disease, so this can't multiply in lethality paradox does not assume longer incubation time mutations, which allows the spread before fatality, which is an independent impact. Yeah.
Concession on the one.
Oh yeah. Concede innovation, some amount of innovation is happening now. It takes out the link of the DA because it's not a first mover advantage, but doesn't solve our internal link because our internal link is about commercialization, i.e. spreading it across the globe and trading it with other countries. Advantage term.
Or concede commercialization is happening now.
Okay.
The internal link for
Yeah.
crime is about enforcement.
Yeah, the internal link is about enforcement, so concede commercialization is happening now. Advantage term. They've conceded the magnitude of our internal link. There's an industry collapsing drug shortage, just providing vaccine cooperation and deployment does not solve the supply side, which is key. GBS said the solution to this was to spend trillions of dollars. That's bad. Excessive spending in bold adversaries causing more. Just 21 cents of federal spending causing economic security risk. We're counting private investment increase the chance we get on downturn tax. When increasing harmful effects of growth carbons, might reduce defense spending holding adversaries. China would be the ability to borrow, compete, invaluable defeating. To talk to your regime spending would be jeopardizing the American less able to afford to attack foreign governments, terror seekers. Would war become much more dangerous. Excessive spending causes global great power. For instance, 25 great power declines likely. Double sense of the diselement of Russia, Hungary, Germany, Russia. This coverage just would raise the world in great power where the important reason for the U.S. is comparable for cost of sovereignty. The extended defense budget maturity of debt is quite short. That's much more sensitive. Prevalence, the actions, of course, here in Patriots, no fiscal position, the former contained. They say it's also the overreach advantage. An exemption is not our scenario. It's a question of FDA action. It's not a question of FDA action. It's a question of what companies are enforcing it and doing the plan, which is and plus they drop the MECOS evidence at the bottom of it when you see that absent full abolition, the PTO will circumvent this, and work around any and then resurrect the PTO will end resurrect the law of use requirement in the long term. So consider it's not FDA, so it doesn't matter anyway. Condoms, bad research are good. They goes for persistent with the least offenses, incentivizing research and depth. Dispo can confirms with theory. Let's all crossing this binding one position is good. Key to argument for responsibility checks vagueness. 2, textualism crushes ground, which triggers red ground applied reciprocally, which means hybrid testing is valid, which leads ground. 3, conceded in the truancy. Binding means whatever is an argument, which means it includes arguments that are new, which is so they dropped condo. Kennedy. Kenneth Marcus is deeply flawed. Companies now struggle to turn profits. That's last. Small to medium firms are taking off taxes last. 24 small to medium firms are benefiting from legalization. Kenneth created 2 license classes again struggling for profit high taxes and force producers. The price and low fees are high. Stocks now show that the market is not proceeding. Now 1/3 stock in this now 7.7% charge dropping every year. Force past 4 years almost. Market went down the past year 2 dropped more than 50%. Regulations are bad. Numbers 24 Detroit. And like 24 stores. The biggest takeaways are the private course and proportion and pricing websites are illicit websites offered by choice of many rights producers and the competitors regulated by 535 listen and 918 listen market. That's an enormous given at the advantage because we're not faced with the same regulations. They can the flex price more easily and the production is simple. They cheap and they can use pesticides. Kindler is biased as the director of their own cannabis company, and they're not describing what's happened to Canada, the cannabis industry. They're just saying what should happen. Linton is our offense assisted markets will expand internationally, quote, including the U.S. Our small market firms, their small firms index this. They dictate the macro environment. The link is 0. The plan does not take away Canadian IPR. They still have the first movers since they're getting there first. That's all they're evidence. If you find it to be true, lawful use is not key. Other regulations solve. Plus, their cards about possessing IP, creating first mover for Canadians, not U.S. blocking international first movement. FE, next, possessing technology and intellectual property rights and regulating administrative cannabis and well-done technology tools providing product products low cost. costs while they expand the market to unlock more portable opportunities for Canadian companies. The impact is horrendous. Cannabis is not key. They have zero evidence it spills over or even causes Canadian economic decline writ large. It's just logical. Canada's growth has existed for years per their cars. They read at the end of the 1 hour. Matthews is highlighted like a Christmas tree somehow and is still more apt than neg. It lists two scenarios, but the only one that they've said goes nuclear is highly unlikely, so starting at zero. The impact cards they read at the top of the 1 hour beg the question of secession, which are impacts which we're contesting. Now go back to uniqueness. 1 hour. Let's assess the industry has been ignored. Listen, then 25, the industry's been screaming for changes to the board. They've been effectively ignored. First mover.
Yeah. And then can you extend first mover advantage? And then they still maintain it.
Yeah. First mover advantage is not key. There's clearly other sources of funding in R&D that the cannabis economy is providing. We read the fee and that says that regulations with other things like exporting cannabis are the alpha's not legalized marijuana, so there's no link to the second link to the red in the 1 hour. It just provides a lawful use exception. And the second thing is that the app is not IP is not key to the first card they read. That said uniqueness solved in Turns case. It just lists a bunch of things that are happening outside of intellectual property rights. So there's zero Turns case argument. Fiat definitely solves this. Mixes allows cannabis innovation and commercialization. People, there's no reason people would come to the U.S. because they still have lucrative markets there.
Okay. 4:05. Starting. Yeah. court says that he can fill a gap in multilateral institutions to stave off global disorder as a product of nuclear war, environmental catastrophe, terror, cyber, and resource pressures which are otherwise existential. They're uniquely situated to lead other countries and incentivize cooperation across nations, but that's only possible if they're in a position of economic strength and can effectively exercise their influence. Cannabis directly trades off. It's the linchpin of their economy, and we're the only ones reading specific evidence. The focus economics part is surprisingly good. It says that the lawful use requirement would trade off with others. Abolishing the lawful use requirement would trade off with sectors like agriculture and manufacturing, which are intertwined with cannabis innovation, which means it ripples throughout the entire economy and decimates leadership broadly. It also turns the case. The link means that the act causes more industry uncertainty, which leads to more smuggling as an alternative. They've also dropped that Canada's innovation is more effective. They're innovating the same products but more effectively, which means it solves advantage 2. They read cards in advantage 1, even if they haven't extended the impacts proper that say that cannabis can be applied to things like disease, which means that allowing Canadian innovators to do so and presumably spread them to other countries through cooperation, and it solves the same internal link, uniqueness. It's a crutch. MBA has not updated their cards in months, and it shows. 1, new regs. They're consumer and producer friendly. Yes, it used to be terrible, but the result of their new expert commission was to create these new friendly regulations which help the industry. That's Kibler. The author index are asinine. You should trust industry leaders here because they have no incentive to lie. And they say Canada is doing good now, they say Canada is doing good now when saying they're doing bad could help their business more because it would presumably encourage other countries or agencies to give them more funding. The 2 uncertainties down. Quote, this says, quote, Canada has already gone through growing pains, which also answers the econ unique stuff at the bottom. Even if everyone didn't survive, the producers still around are ready to expand to international markets. That's Linton. They've also dropped tariffs, and macroeconomics are uniquely good for firms, which their cards don't assume. This previous trade-off. Canada can assert broad international leadership with cannabis, but it relies on the U.S. having lots of demand. This isn't an aft party because it says Canada will inevitably expand. When the last Brooksing and Lammers are offered before the new regulations, and we don't need to win. The industry is doing great, just that they're able to sustain themselves. The link, all their defense is wrong. Our cards are about the lawful use requirement and how abolishing it would trade off with Canada's first mover advantage. The U.S.'s innovation ecosystem is broadly better than Canada's, but and abolishing the lawful use requirement causes a flood of innovators who want to move their products to the U.S. instead because it would run a more favorable ecosystem writ large. Most of the link defense is new, which means you should strike it since it wasn't in the 2EC, and the block was premised on 2EC the block was based on 2EC mistakes. Say it doesn't trade off with first mover advantages. That was done above. Innovators have an incentive to move to the U.S., which obviously directly trades off with Canada's industry because it means those innovations are no longer being effectively used there. Other regulations solve a new argument, and it doesn't matter because our cards are all about lawful use. They say cannabis isn't key. Yes, and cannabis is key. The focus economics card was extended on the overview. It's the only specific evidence in this debate, which means you should automatically defer to it. The IP not key stuff was answered above and was a blip at the bottom of the 1AR, and all the commercialization stuff doesn't matter or will be answered on the counterclaim. Concede the deficit, and I concede it's conditional. I'm not going for it. I'll do condo here. Drop every offensive reason for why they shouldn't get this. Drop that it incentivizes reading cards and making brainer arguments, and instead of answering your opponent's questions, which deletes the entire purpose of cross-ex. That wrecks fairness. Excuse both sides of the debate. Drop a condo is binding just means that what you say is binding, and what you say in cross-ex about the arguments that you've already introduced is binding. Not that they get new arguments during cross-ex. Vagueness is still by interpret because cross-ex is still binding. No hypotesting, and we're more reciprocal because both sides still need to tell the truth. We didn't drop it's binding. I answer this. Go to the marijuana advantage. Drop the Chinese crime groups are so desperate to get money that they'll shift to other forms, even if all their stats are SQO descriptive. I.e., say that currently they're SQO descriptive, but there's no reason that they wouldn't shift to other means. They wouldn't shift to other means in the future if it's such a large source of revenue, which means cracking down on one avenue is insufficient, since things like human trafficking and other substances would overwhelm it. Go to disease. Drop the brown card. It cites empirical evidence about that Cruz disease will never cause extinction. It cites data on every single pandemic and even
Canadian leadership solves
antimicrobial
pandemics.
resistance.
Drop.
Solves pandemics. Drop.
Well, you want a card doc?
No.
Okay.
I always abuse them, so I'm just gonna orientate against them.
Advantage 2, advantage 1. Yeah.
So overreach first.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Sam, you're guarding affirmativeness debate because Viva got to the only scenario that I'm extending with 10 seconds left on the timer, and Evan only yelled out the turn's case argument after it went off. And disease outweighs its cascades and ripples throughout humanity, causing a quick and fast extinction. Do not feel prey to GBS's impact run and gun strategy. If their internal link is weak, frame all impact calculus to the internal link. The DA is the 0 because their internal link makes no sense because Canada isn't key to Canada's economy. We have a strong internal link because they've considered the AF solves for an impending drug shortage that will ruin all former vaccine deployment strategies and all former pandemic stopgaps that have prevented pandemics like COVID from escalating in the past, which means that our AF is key to literally all drugs ever because compounding drugs are able to fill in for the current drug shortage, and only through the lawful use doctrine are we able to bolster those drugs because right now they're being stifled by companies like Eli Lilly and a big pharma. The tuner has also not inserted knock-on effects, which will be your ballot. Geoengineering of the stratosphere is prevented once pandemics occur because we don't inject as many aerosol particles, causing a collapse of the Earth's core ecosystem because the stratosphere crumbles. Coupled with that is cognitive and civilizational collapse. Both drop. Humanity will go down because our general intellect decreases, and because the structures of civilization will go down. Go back and read our 1AC bomb evidence that makes both of these arguments clearly, and every single affirmative said their evidence doesn't
assume knock-on effects like geoengineering of the stratosphere and cognitive collapse, which the 2NR has zero ink on, which means that even if empirics in the past were wrong, these both indict that because they didn't assume that either way. They've dropped that empirics don't assume new interconnectedness and globalization, which is increasing in the status quo, which is obviously assumed by our Bond card because Bond is from 2 years ago, which assumes every single empiric and is far more qualified than their authors. And you also don't have a warrant pretty much extending to the 2NR. They said drop round card and cites empirical evidence disease never caused extinction. That's all I got down because there were only 10 seconds left on the timer, so you should not read into the evidence because they did not provide you with any of its warrants. And you can't cross-apply disease solves their ABR defense because they've conceded that our impact is not about ABR and Canadian leadership. It's a question of the link which will be indicted there. Marijuana. They've dropped the concession that they'll drop the concession that marijuana innovation in the U.S. is high and being commercialized now because if it exists, it commercializes, which as 2C clearly said. Russell clearly drops, which means that the link is thumped and taken out because the first mover advantage has already been triggered, which means that it doesn't matter if the plan might cause it because it's thumped in the status quo. Kennedy. Turns case is wrong. It's a question of the internal link. It does not solve advantage 2 because our evidence on advantage 1 is about solving antibiotic resistance, which is categorically different than disease broadly because antibiotic resistance is a question of whether like bacteria and things can become resistant and can cause infectious diseases. Our scenario on advantage 2 is about virulent diseases, which is categorically different. Uniqueness is posed. Canada's own argument government admits they're deeply flawed. 201, the 2NR's push on regulation is bad. I don't have to indict this claim because Deloitte already did it for us with 678 Canadian cannabis companies. Regulations only apply to legal companies with illicit stores circumventing them. That means their legal market in Canada goes down, decreasing the ability for Canada to have legally contributing stores that can pay taxes, which is their internal link. They've dropped that their Kimbler card is making normative statements about the status quo, not how the market is doing in the stat. Right now, I encourage you, go and open the full article and see that the bottom of the card is advocating what Canada should do, not what it's doing in the status quo. Either way, you don't know if they're trying to support or hurt the industry, as the 2NR says, so you should err on the side of non-biased experts and statistics. Stocks don't lie. The cannabis companies in Canada have been going down for the past 4 years, which means that since 2018 when they legalized it, for the past 4 of the 7 years, the cannabis companies have been going down, which means the cannabis market is overall going down. They read the full GBS card, please. They drop the re-highlight. It flows out. It says the industry has been screaming for change and support and have been effectively ignored, which proves our offense that regulations and taxes are not being circumvented, which means the market is still deeply flawed. Macroeconomics can only be our word because it is explained through the light. So microeconomics dropped 1 year last, which says that small firms are still very constrained by high taxes and regulatory fees. They've also not explained how. They've also not really explained why cannabis is key to Canada's economy. They've certainly asserted this focus economics card says that it's key to agriculture and manufacturing, but they haven't shown any claim that the manufacturing agricultural parts of the economy are key to its leadership broadly. And the part of the card that they've highlighted just says that it might spill over, not that would affect all of these sectors wholesale. Canada's only legalized marijuana since 2018, and since it hasn't evolved to what the 2NR describes the linchpin of Canada's economy, which means that you should air out because it's also thumped because Canada's economy has been going down the past several years, which means readership should have declined in the meantime, which means the time frame push just means uniqueness is a thumper for us. The link evidence is also about 0. It's about possessing property rights in Canada, and the app does not change that, which means it's a very easy app ballot on uniqueness and a thumper and a very high risk case.
Great.
Thanks.
This was a really good debate. I really enjoyed judging it. I ended up voting affirmative. I think the risk of disease causing collapse of human civilization because of after effects like the loss of geoengineering is greater than the risk of that the plan causes Canadian leadership decline. I'll start on place. I think the risk of the scenario is very high. I think the 1AR made it pretty clear that going for these external impacts like geoengineering would be their way out of defense. And unfortunately, I don't think the 2AR really grapples with this distinction. I think there's definitely an argument to be made that all of the defense probably takes out some of these second level impacts because they assume disease scales through a large level, but I don't think this is made in 2NR. So even though I think it's probably true, I don't evaluate it as such. Canada leadership is different. It is difficult for me to evaluate. This is like the saying the argument made at the very bottom. Did you get it to it with time? I think you probably have the words Canadian leadership solves pandemics on the flow. You definitely got cannabis solves disease and disad here, which I'll also talk about right now. Ultimately, well, I think this is definitely necessary for you to be making a counter plan. I don't think I can pull a trigger on it in this debate. I think this extrapolation is probably new in the 2NR. You definitely get it because it is a logical extension of your cards, but the 2AR almost assuredly gets new answers. And because you got so little time left, I just don't think you really have time to flesh out and frame this argument like it needs to be packaged for it to be a sufficient win condition for you. So when the 2AR gets there and attempts to distinguish the scenario from the pandemics that the cannabis solves on the DISAD and also the Crane evidence, I just don't have a reciprocal explanation for the negative that I can hold up against this, so I just have to go with what the app says and assume that the diseases they solve are different than the diseases y'all solve. I think the 1NR needs to set up this argument pretty explicitly as DISAD solves case. I think if you think you might not go for the counter plan, this needs to be a stronger push, and setting it up early through this lens will benefit you. I think the 2NR does this implicitly in the overview at some points, but I really think in a debate like this, the 2NR needs to start with this as your major push rather than generic Canada always overview. Like DISAD keep to solve Canadian leadership, which resolves every impact of the 1AC, which means a 1% risk-free access econ is sufficient. It's not set up for me like this explicitly. So I think given how I evaluated other parts of this debate, it would be pretty interventionist for me to think that arbitrarily do this one thing and vote on it. I think if you did do that, you'd be in a much better position, and it would definitely cause, like I spent a lot of time thinking about it, even though I didn't think I was going to be able to vote on it. I definitely was really struggling to decide how I would come down on it. Otherwise, it's a really uphill battle because the app advantage seems very large at this point. I think y'all are debating what seems like a bad DISAD extremely well. Like, I am really impressed with how much I had to think about in this debate. But starting from the economic standpoint, I think y'all are in trouble. I think your use cards are excellent, and most certainly regulations in Canada are getting better for cannabis. I think MBA, however, has gone for two arguments that work really well together and don't rely on uniqueness. It's the cannabis not key to Canada's economy and the uniqueness arguments it suffers. I think packaged together are pretty brutal. The 2NR says that regulations, quote, used to be terrible, but that they're getting better. I think this only feeds MBA's 2AR argument where they say if regs were so bad and Canada is so key, it would have been triggered. I don't think the 2NR really grapples with this, so even if I spot y'all that regulations are good, and I think Kibler is really good about this. I think MBA is pretty ahead about this just brutally disrupting the link and internal link level of DISAD. So in a world where I'm left with, I guess, some risk of a disease impact that your own impact defense is kind of mitigated, and I'm not really sure how to resolve that, so that's kind of confusing for me, and a pretty low risk of Canadian leadership decline, and versus a very high risk of disease causing geoengineering collapse, I just think that all makes sense. I'm happy to answer questions. I really did spend a lot of time thinking about it. It was really good debate. I really enjoyed watching it.
Do you think I should have extended the counter plan to get out of, or to help resolve the disease stuff, or should I have just invested a lot in like DISAD solves the case?
So I think either is fine. I think my lack of knowledge about the inner workings of the counter plan probably will inhibit me from giving you a very knowledgeable answer. I think I would have invested in more just DISAD solves case stuff. I think the 1AR does not give, I think you kind of implicitly answer Crane, but you never like say the word Crane. Which I think when they're just like laundry listing things, you probably need to be like, this evidence sucks, doesn't matter. And so I think frame, like just like pathos wise, just like setting it up, or ethos wise, just setting it up is like, they drop Crane, list every impact of the 1AC. We most certainly solve all their impacts over percent risk. Is much more persuasive, especially just because I don't quite, like, I don't know. I think the counterclaim probably solves disease. I think you can probably solve disease. I think the 2R will try to say, the 2R will spin this as like, our disease is different, like they did in this debate. And I didn't think about that hard because I just don't know what the argument for that is. But I think both are viable. I don't think this, like, you not going to kind of cost you the way you need capacity. But I think you definitely also could have gone for it.
Do you think for the like bumper double bind sort of thing, there was a way to get out of it, or is it just like a structural flaw like it does that?
I think your evidence is like fine to mitigate it in some capacity. I think the two arguments you need are, well, I wouldn't give them that regulations used to be bad. I think you need to fight that at some level. And two, I think you need to do comparative analysis about why even if cannabis used to not be key, it's increasingly becoming key. And that gets you out of like the time frame thing where regulations used to be bad, so why can cannabis economy collapse? Which your cards might say, I'm not sure, I didn't read them very hard. I think this is more just like the tutor needs to give you that explicit analysis, which I know is hard because it's like a extrapolation from 2-1AR things that were not flagged super well. In fact, I would be kind of worried that someone else would call them new. I don't think they are, but I would be worried just like someone just be like, so no.
Do you think there would be a way to like, because we have that card that's like on the, instead go for like the secessionism impact, because we have that card that's like, you know, like new institutional politics or whatever means that it's the next, like the secessionism movement has been dead for forever, but it's going to come back the next election cycle. Would there be any way to spin that to answer a thumper, like now is key, or do you think it's like just still the economy stuff is like divorced from that?
I think in its current form, that would probably get you a lot of skin.
Okay.
I don't think that analysis is that explicit in this 2-NR, so I'm
Yeah.
not sure if I'm not sure if the 2AR would be to that, but so in this form, yes, I think that probably gets you pretty far ahead.
So do you think we could have done something where it's like that, and then just essentially explain Crane as like a counterclaim that
Yes.
solves the case?
Yes, I really think Crane needs to be a counterclaim, regardless what you do, but that makes sense. How you just
Alright.
Oh yeah, the like commercialization thing in the MIR, like they conceded it. I think I probably like I don't know if I like phrased it exactly how they thought I phrased it, but it was just like I forgot to start on my flow and missed it. Did that matter for you, or was it just?
So I originally had this in my decision, and then I decided I did not understand the argument enough to like even talk about it very well. In fact, I'm really confused about what you mean by this at all. Like the commercialization is high now, so you have made the first mover or is already entrenched argument elsewhere, and so I don't understand why this is different than that. It seems to me like it just seems to the same point, like first mover already happened, so no way we turn off from that. Am I correct in that understanding?
It's like, it's another first mover now.
Yeah, okay. I think you just need to be like, this is literally like what they just said, like this is just literally the same repackaged argument. We indict a first mover, so irrelevant.
I think we're good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Good luck, India.
Good luck.
Thanks.